Hey, 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 everybody. Welcome to the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I am Santita Jackson. It is a joy to be with you. Hey, Ashley King down there in Memphis, Tennessee, and Robert, shalom to you. Everybody, please like and subscribe on my YouTube channel at Santita. Well, no, at Santita J. That's X. But my YouTube channel is the Santita Jackson Show. The Santita Jackson Show. Meet Ashley and Robert and everybody over there. So please like the show. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. The Santita Jackson and Friends page, Santita Jackson and Friends, back when I had big hair. So please go on over there and become my friend there. That's the only place where I can accept friends. That's the only place. You know, as from the last hour, we are pushing um, against voter suppression. The plan is for 2 million Black and brown and Asian people to be removed from the polls, from the voter rolls. And guess what? As of a couple of weeks ago, 851,000 have been removed. And Attorney Janice Mathis, General Counsel for the National Council of Negro Women, most people who've been removed from the polls don't know it. That's what's unsettling to me. We don't know. They're getting these flimsy little cards in the mail, and we all get junk mail. We are inundated with campaign uh, mailers, and so you just start throwing things out. But what you might be throwing out is a card that's telling you that your name has been removed, that your vote has that you've been challenged, that someone has decided to challenge your right to vote. That's a way of purging. But the other purges are just happening because they said you have a black sounding name and your name sounds like so and so in California. So you get purged. It's happening to Latinos, it's happening to Asian people, and I'm sure it's happening to Arab Americans too. Anyone with a name that's not WASP, E, you're having a problem. The danger is this with vote.org, as we tell you every day here, please go to vote.org and make sure that you're registered. Many of you go check and you check one time and that's it. You actually need to be checking every day because if you are purged, you only have until October 7th to get back on the rolls. If you are not registered on that last day, where you don't have same day on site registration like in Mississippi and in Florida and in Georgia and in Texas, you will not be able to vote in this election. You can get registered. You can vote in another election, but it won't be this one. Attorney Janice Mathis, I mean, I don't know. When it hit me like a ton of bricks when I saw that. I said, wait a minute. We don't even know how much danger we're in. Because these people have a goal of 2 million people that they plan to push off the rolls. That's the election, Janice.
That's absolutely right. And it is not a hit or miss operation. It is a planned, strategic crusade almost to disenfranchise people of color, people in low wealth communities, people who may not vote every year, they may not vote every 2 years. But just because I didn't vote in 2022, does that justify denying me the right to vote in 2024? And some of these states, and if let me posit this, Santina, and thank you so much for the work that you are doing. If
Thank you
election
for
were,
being my mentor and my inspiration. How about that?
well, that's
Thank
high praise, and I appreciate it and I accept it, and will do my best to live up to it in some fashion or another. But if the problem was a universal, widespread problem of election interference or election failure, wouldn't it cover many states? Wouldn't you see it in places like California and places
you.
like Mississippi? But why is it that we only hear these cries about voter fraud in swing states? And I
Hmm.
will say to you that the reason we only hear about it in swing states, that's part of the plan. The plan is to delegitimize confidence in elections in those states that matter in the presidential election. So you see it in Michigan, you see it in North Carolina, you see it in Georgia, you see it in Nevada, where there are lots of Spanish speaking people. You see it, and lots of hospitality workers
Mm-hmm.
who are unionized and who know that it's important for them to vote. The targeting is very strategic. You're beginning to see it in places like New York, where there are congressional races that are up for grabs. There's a hot Senate race in Ohio. If it were truly a question of lack of integrity of elections, it would not hop, skip, and jump hopscotch around the country and land only in places where the outcome makes a difference in the presidential election. And Michigan is in turmoil. North Carolina is in turmoil with the person that they've nominated to run for governor of
Ooh.
North Carolina on the Republican side. And the former president's sons are praising him to the high heavens. But it's particularly egregious in Georgia. And I guess because, I've got Georgia roots that I pay close attention to it. It was an affront to some elements of Georgia politics that you would elect a Jew and a black man to the United States Senate, the most exclusive club in the world, only 100 members, and that you would elect Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff in 2020 to the United States Senate. There are Georgians who are just about to lose their minds because they never thought they would see Georgia, deep red Georgia, with a supermajority red legislature. They never expected to see a resurgence of people power in the state of Georgia. But it has come. Some of it is demographic, some of it is the gifts of those candidates. 37% of Georgia's congressional delegation is now black.
How much?
37%,
Oh,
which is
wow.
just about the population of the the percentage of the population of Georgia that is black. Today, this day, within an hour or two ago, the State Board of Elections has now launched an investigation, not of the entire state of Georgia. This is another example of this picking and choosing where you will land if voter fraud is widespread and pervasive in Georgia. Why would it choose 7 counties out of 159 to land?
7 out of 159. Unbelievable. Everybody, please go to
Counties
vote.org.
in Georgia, only, and I'm going to name those counties: Athens, Clarke, Bibb, Cobb, DeKalb, Forsyth, Fulton, and Gwinnett and Jackson. What do those have in common?
Hmm.
They tend to vote Democratic. They tend to have a little bit more wealth than the other counties. That's Atlanta. That's DeKalb County, where there are 700,000 folk eligible to vote. Those are the ones that have been singled out for special investigation of you didn't respond adequately to the voter challenges. Any person, me, anybody who is a voter in Georgia, can challenge any voter, and there's no limit to the number of challenges. One woman challenged more than 10,000 voters' qualifications to vote. She didn't know them. She couldn't have identified them. It's simply a computer matching program that says, there's a person with the same name registered to vote in South Carolina. We're going to challenge that because that might be that same person attempting to vote in 2 states. It is completely specious. And at this stage in the election process, we're within 40 days of
Mm-hmm.
the election. Early voting starts in Georgia on October the 15th. The law says clearly that if you're going to purge voters, you need to do it 45 days before the election. We're within that, which is why the state of Georgia is being sued by both the National Democratic Party and the state Democratic Party. because it is clearly illegal to be challenging voters. Now, think about what used to be the law, just for nostalgia's sake. Up until 2013, the Voting Rights Act required that before any change to election processes and procedures could be changed, it had to be reviewed and approved by the United States Department of Justice. Well, as of 2013, Shelby versus Holder did away with that requirement. Not because voters don't still need protection of their right to vote, but in order to assure a certain political outcome. And I guess that's the bottom line point I'm trying to make. This is not about election fraud. It's not about election tampering. This is about trying to generate results that a certain group of people want to have. The reason this Board of Elections in Georgia got changed, the legislature, the supermajority Republican legislature, met in special session to change the composition of the State Board of Elections to take Raffensperger, whatever you think about Raffensperger, he had enough guts to say no to Trump when he asked him for 11,000 votes. They took him off. Now he is the Secretary of State charged with administering elections in the state. They removed the Secretary of State from the Board of Elections.
Wait.
Well, no, that
What?
the Secretary of
Is that
State.
legal? Is that
Well,
legal?
that's why Georgia is being sued. That is the substance of one of the many lawsuits that is now pending in Georgia. Can the legislature remove the official charged with administering elections from the State Board of Elections?
No. Jan.
Raffensperger
Attorney
and
Mathis, I'm gonna have to
you think I'm
interject.
making this up?
You wait. They removed the
The
wait. Stop.
legislature,
The Secretary of State who was elected by the state.
yes,
They removed who removed him?
the legislature
What?
voted. The
Uh,
state legislature, which has a supermajority of conservative members, Republicans, voted to reconstruct, to redetermine how the State Board of Elections, they're not elected, they're appointed. How are they, who determines and how do they determine who can be on that State Board of Elections, which is charged with overseeing elections in all 159 of those counties? And so they removed Raffensperger. Remember, Raffensperger was the one that President Trump called and said, can't you I just need to find 11,000 votes. And Raffensperger, he's a conservative, he's a Republican, but he has sense enough, integrity enough to say, I'm sorry, Mr. President, I can't do that. That is not within my authority. I cannot do it. The phone call was recorded. That's the only reason we know about it. The secretary in the office recorded the phone call. That Secretary of State and the Attorney General has advised this current State Board of Elections that what you're doing is beyond your power to do, and it is likely illegal, which is why the State Board of Elections is being sued. But what elections board operating with any kind of integrity would not take the advice of the sitting Attorney General and the sitting Secretary of State, who are of the same party? Am I making you tired?
no, I mean I'm just trying to.
It's
No.
mind-boggling.
I wanted you to go through this because I don't think we understand just I mean how aggressively our voting rights are being attacked. And it's so systematic.
Yes,
I mean,
it
these
is.
people have studied the laws. They have studied the structure. We're reacting to them while they have a plan. Dr. King said, while evil men plot, good men must plan. You all keep listening to conspiracy theory. Please don't use that term with me. That came from the CIA. In the wake of the Kennedy assassination, no one believed the Warren Commission. My mother said that was the most horrible thing that happened in modern American history. I said, really? She said, oh yeah. She said after that everything came apart because you didn't trust the government. You didn't trust anybody anymore because they killed the president in the middle of the street.
That is the point. That if I can undermine public confidence in elections, in elected officials, in institutions, in that there's no such thing as objective truth. Truth is whatever I say today, whatever I choose to say today. Um, then people lose all sense of belonging in a society.
But see, Attorney Mathis, the way you're going through this, and I wasn't trying to interrupt you. I was just making a comment that David Daly's book Rat F's The True Story of the Secret Plan to Steal Our Democracy. I mean, this is like reading out of, you can't make this up. I mean,
No,
these people removed the legislature who've been elected, removed the Secretary of State from his job.
yes, that's what it amounts to. It seems like something out of a futurist fantasy of
Saturday
what.
Night Live, Monty Python, Second City. This is a joke.
And I
I
think the
mean, when you talk
lesson
about
that,
saving democracy, these people turn all this into a joke. This is a joke.
it's a joke, except that it has real life consequences
Oh my
for
gosh.
voters. We are effectively in some places where the elections are hotly contested, like Georgia, like North Carolina, like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, are living in a under a system that is no longer majority rule.
Hmm.
It is some type of minority cabal that has taken over the government and decided that it will rule in lieu of whatever the people might say at the elect. And so, what do we do about it? Obviously, lawsuits, judges have the power to overturn what's going on in Georgia and other places. The question is, will they?
Mm.
Because judges too are appointed, and they're not elected all the time. Federal judges are appointed, but they're appointed by politicians who have certain political preferences. And I think what we have to say to folk is, do not be dissuaded by the shenanigans. Don't fall for the hype. The one thing that we have still at our disposal is checking your plan, confirming your registration status, whether you vote early, whether you vote on the same day, whether you vote by mail, but you must cast your ballot. In Georgia, they've made it easier. It's hard to register to vote in Georgia. You got to have a state issued photo ID. You got to be able to get mail at that address, which means you may not, if you're unhoused, homeless, as we say, you might not be able to get your voter registration confirmed. But they make it easier to deregister you. If I know, Santita, your first initial and your last name and your date of birth, I can go to a public facing website operated by the state of Georgia and say that I am you and that I no longer live in Georgia and I no longer want to be a registered voter. Now, how easy is it to get somebody's first initial and last name and date of birth? That's all it takes. Now, in order to register, you got to have photo ID, and you got to have an address, and you got to have um, obviously a date of birth, last four digits of your social security number. You need all of that to register. But to unregister you, and there are computer programs that can generate that information, and you can deregister thousands of people at a time. Do you
That's what.
remember? You remember back in the Bush v. Gore days?
Yeah.
They ran a computer program. I think it came out of Alabama that was falsely identifying people as having duplicate voter registrations or having names so similar or having names so similar to people who have been convicted of crime that they should be disallowed the right to vote. This is
Yeah,
very similar to that.
this
This
is
is, there was a book, oh, I guess a decade ago now, called Democracy in Chains. And the book was written by a woman, and she was criticized hotly by historians at famous universities around the South for her research not being. But she described then a plan to systematically disenfranchise progressives, liberals, Democrats, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, you may have democracy, but we're going to hamstring democracy with so many rules and regulations that um, cannot be challenged in a timely way. The beauty of the Voting Rights Act, what made it so different, what made it so special, they could stop devilment before it occurred with Section 5. Most of the time, you can't stop it until you can't do anything. You can't go charge somebody with murder because you think they're getting ready to murder somebody. They're getting ready to steal something. They have the intent to do it. No, you got to have an act in furtherance of the intent. The Voting Rights Act, and the reason it's called one of the most effective pieces of legislation ever, all you had to do is pick up the phone, call the Justice Department. Clark County is about to change the voting procedures. We're within 45 days of an election. The Justice Department had the power to stop that procedure from being changed until it could be reviewed, even if it meant going to court. Take that away, and then you see this proliferation, this tsunami of voter suppression, voter intimidation, guns at polling places. I am not an alarmist. I tend to be an optimist. But in a meeting at the White House 2 years ago, I warned them then, Chuck Schumer and Biden. I was with a group of Black women that we're going to experience violence and we're going to experience massive undermining of the right to vote and integrity of elections. That's where we are. I'm not saying that to be to scare people, but to say if you care about this, people don't try to steal something from you that doesn't have value.
mm,
And the fact that there's so much energy, what's his name? From South Carolina. Lindsey Graham was out in Nebraska day before yesterday, wasn't he? Trying to convince them to change the way they count their votes to make it easier for his preferred candidate to claim the electoral votes of Nebraska.
this is just. I don't think we have to understand how widespread this is, how deep this is, and how coordinated this is.
And take, for example, what's going on in Texas. Colin Allred is giving Ted Cruz a fit in
Yes,
Texas.
he is.
He is at his nipping at his heels, about to take that Senate seat away from
Ted
Cruz.
Cruz. Girl, wait a minute. I'm seeing him raise funds at 2 and 3 in the morning, uh, all over television here in Chicago,
Exactly. He's a
begging for money.
he's an
Ted Cruz.
intellectually attractive candidate. He seems knowledgeable. He speaks well. He seems kind of moderate, not a real firebrand liberal by any means. Texas is undergoing some of the same. That's why I say this is very much a results oriented campaign. You going after that seat because if Cruz falls, then what's next? Texas legislature, Texas governorship. Texas is a big, powerful, rich state, changing hands. And and it's the same in Georgia. There are people who never thought they would see the day that Georgia would be ruled in a more democratic way across the board with people who represent real working class, everyday folk all across those 159 counties. And when you choose Fulton and DeKalb to go after, you're going after black folk. Those are the biggest, blackest. Now, Savannah has got a larger percentage of black folk, but I'm talking about the
In
size of the
numbers.
population,
Yeah.
the wealth, the influence. Everybody wants to go to it now.
Go to vote.org
Yes, ma'am.
every single day because voting, early voting has started in some places. It starts in other places at the beginning of October, mid October, 15th to 22nd. You need to check every day to make sure that you are still on the voter rolls because if you do not get registered by October 7th, you will not be able to vote in this election. We cannot overstate this. What Attorney Mathis has done, I'm going to bring up Mel Buer from the Real. I'm so glad
Yeah.
she's moving to Chicago. Yay!
Hello.
Yay! Yeah, well,
Hello.
you've heard us talk. I mean, you've heard us talking about the vote. I mean, this and what we're going to be talking about is an extension of it. But I am so excited that this brilliant writer from the Real News is with us, and of course, you are with the General Counsel for the National Council of Negro Women. This is our oldest Black women's advocacy organization in the country. Indeed, Mary McLeod Bethune, C. Dolores Tucker, some of the icons of American life have really been at the helm of this organization, as has Attorney Janice Mathis, who I've known all of my life. And listening to her, I mean, well, May is just 2024. Maybe Cat Williams was right. Everything would be revealed. Nothing would be the same because we're seeing things. The quiet part is being spoken out loud. And I'm wanting everyone. That's why I did. But and Attorney Mathis, I wanted you to stay because Mel has done such brilliant work with the unions, and of course, she was senior vice president at Rainbow Push before she went to the National Council of Negro Women. And so she's done extensive work with the unions because Reverend has been very supportive of the unions. And so I have to tell you, yes, my wig was standing on end when I saw the Teamsters. And before I ask you about it, Mel, Attorney Mathis, when you saw that the Teamsters were not going to um, endorse a presidential candidate after they had been heavily courted by former President Trump and Vice President Harris, what did you think?
I think about it a lot, and I don't think that I have a clear answer because I don't understand. In Germany in the 1930s,
Mm.
smart, industrious people were fooled. They were hoodwinked. They were led amok. In the 1950s, in this country, McCarthyism took hold, and it took several years to break away from it. I think it's a combination of fear of loss of power, a combination of um, loss of a white majority, if you will. You know, we used to say it'd be 2040, the United States would no longer be a majority white country. Well, it's just about here. Looks like it's going to get here sooner than 2040. And that makes people feel nervous and insecure that their way of life is being threatened. Some of it is just lust for power.
Yeah.
And then some of it, I think, and this is what I think bothers me the most, is driven by fear of violence. You've got poll workers, governors, judges afraid to do their jobs because they fear political and physical retribution. That is the part that disturbs me the most. And so I've been trying to think about how did we break out of McCarthyism?
I look.
It took
I
World War II to end Nazi stranglehold on Germany. But is there a path for the United States that doesn't have to go through that drastic a revolution? I don't know. It's up to us. That's what I know. But I'm
well,
interested to hear what Mel thinks because she looks like a very thoughtful
and
person, and I'm
what
sure she's much better versed in all this than I am.
Well, I tell you what, whenever there's something, well, first of all, she's a brilliant reporter. And of
Thank
course, you
you.
have a podcast.
Yes, yeah. I co-host the Working People podcast with Max Alvarez over at the Real News Network, and I have been doing various other sort of broad general podcasting for the Real News for the last year and a half.
But we're about to get you in Chicago. I'm so excited.
I know it's going to be a good time. Very
Oh,
excited.
talk to us. I mean, you have, look, I just want to learn because I've got whiplash in 2024. I just, I can't call anything.
Yeah.
And I need you to help me to understand. I see the Teamsters president speaking at the Republican convention. I see Trump going to see him. I see Vice President Harris going to see them, and then you see the board going this way and the rank and file going. What is going on here? And do these endorsements even matter anymore? It seems like they do. Help me. What happened here?
Um, well, this is kind of something that's been brewing for months at this point. The Teamsters have been sort of embroiled in this internal debate about the endorsement issue since last year, about who they're going to endorse, who they're not going to endorse. And they have broken with precedent because they've typically endorsed Democratic presidential nominees for ever, pretty much. And what we've seen over the last, I think probably the last 6 or 7 months, is that Teamsters president Sean O'Brien has been um, having more conversations with the Trump camp. At the Teamsters HQ, he allowed Trump to hold a press conference outside of the Teamsters headquarters with the Teamsters logo in the background after having a meeting with him, talking about issues that the rank and file understandably have concerns about in terms of as it relates to them as a voting bloc within the working class. And, it kind of came to a head when O'Brien was suddenly on the slate for the RNC, and there was a lot of chatter on the internet and amongst the rank and file about O'Brien's appearance. The Real News did a really good panel with rank and file Teamsters after the O'Brien speech at the RNC, just to kind of get a sense of what folks were feeling. And, from the folks that we've talked to, there are a lot of rank and file workers who are sort of dismayed at the route that O'Brien has been taking. And even O'Brien's vice president in the international hierarchy within the international office of the Teamsters doesn't agree and has publicly stated his intentions to run for the presidency when that comes up in the next year or so, I believe. So, even within that international office at the Teamsters Union, there is folks who are sort of breaking with O'Brien's very loud sort of shift toward the Trump camp. And so it's not, from my perspective, it's not a huge surprise that they would remain neutral. The Teamsters also released polling numbers that they had polled their rank and file about who would vote for who, if it was, Trump versus Biden or Trump versus Kamala. And there is some truth to those polls that there are a lot of rank and file Teamsters who are Trump voters or who are conservatives. But the reality is, on a sort of wider scale, it feels at this late in the game, choosing not to endorse a candidate feels sort of moot. We're 40 days away from the election. If there was going to be a sort of will they, won't they kind of conversation, this endorsement happening from the Teamsters, you would expect to see it earlier in the summer. It didn't happen. I think some of the earliest endorsements that happened from various other unions happened well into last year, so it just seemed kind of odd, but yeah, the folks that we've talked to in the last 6 months at the Real News, many of them are they think that O'Brien is kind of being a fool, frankly, and is allowing the conservatives in the RNC and Trump camp to kind of play them like pawns. And they are a significant voting bloc that are, that have some real power in who choose, who becomes the next president and farther down the ticket. And so I think a lot of folks don't appreciate that kind of very public jockeying that's been happening in the lead up to the conventions and after, if that makes sense.
What does it say about the rank and file? What does it say about the leadership? Is there a vast chasm, or is there a mixture of thought?
I think the Teamsters are unique in that, just like the UAW, they have a sort of democratic one member, one vote kind of process when it comes to current presidents electing delegates that go to their, union conventions. They don't have delegates. It's a one member, one vote. But just like any union, there is a wide variety of political opinions. It represents a wide variety of individuals within the working class who all have, they come from different backgrounds, they are different races, they have different priorities at the ballot box, right? And so it would be a mistake to consider any of these unions kind of a monolith within the electoral process, right? And I think it's important to note that this sort of internal debate should happen. And a lot of rank and file members use their union meetings and discuss these issues with each other. Because that is a healthy democracy, right? Now that we're seeing in the last 5 days, there's almost a dozen joint councils, state locals that are Teamsters affiliated that have voted themselves to endorse Harris Walt's campaign and saying, screw the international, we'll just do it ourselves, right? That sort of illustrates that there is this kind of gap between the sort of O'Brien-run international presidency and what's happening in states like Michigan, where the Teamsters local in Michigan has absolutely enthusiastically voted to endorse Kamala Harris and, are likely gearing up their members to go door knocking for her, So, and that's to your point as well. Endorsements are important when you look at it from the perspective of if a union has voted to endorse a certain candidate, then they can start shifting PAC funds that they've gathered from their membership into those campaigns. There's kind of a process that they have to go through. And they can also mobilize their members to go door knocking, to do voter drives, to do these types of things. That makes it a lot easier when you have that endorsement and you have this sort of leadership that's moving the rank and file in that direction. They're not going to tell you who to vote for, but they are going to strongly encourage you to really pay attention to the candidate that they've endorsed. And, understandably, these endorsements they come after much research into the candidate. Is the candidate going to be good for organized labor? Or do they have a good voting record according to the AFL-CIO? If they're, state or local candidates, right? Everyone gets a little grade percentage about whether or not they support labor legislature and policies and all these things. Harris being part of the Biden administration has a bit of a record to say that, we have between the two candidates, between Trump's administration and a Biden-Harris administration, conditions were much better under a Biden-Harris administration than they were under Trump, particularly with the NLRB and what its powers to be able to kind of enforce labor law and things of that, interpret labor law and things of that nature. I will say the bar is kind of subterranean, like it's through the floor. So, in terms of could it be better? Absolutely. Could a Harris administration be pushed to do better for the working class, for organized labor in the United States? Absolutely. I think so. But between the two, these endorsements are coming from these unions for the Democratic ticket because we know what a Trump administration has done for organized labor, and it was not good, so it is. I'm getting in the weeds here, but
No,
I think
Oh,
that,
this is helpful. This is
yeah,
good.
I think that it's in terms of like specifically the Teamsters endorsement, O'Brien's posturing over the last 6 to 8 months, almost a year, about
why is he doing that? Why?
it could be personal politics. He spends a lot of time talking about, I want to cater to both sides, and I want to be able to approach both candidates and say these are our priorities for our Teamsters membership, and Trump is answering the phone. I think that he's also.
He's
But he
testing
does a lot of.
keep the
I'm
union
sorry.
together. That if you've got divergent opinions among the members, among the rank and file, you don't want to take sides. You want to stay neutral and keep everybody in the camp.
Well, I think that's certainly one way that you could approach this, and O'Brien may be doing that, right? Because again, there is a very large percentage of Teamsters membership that are conservative, that will vote Republican in November, that will likely vote for Trump. Many Republicans will not vote for Trump, but probably won't vote third party, and I don't know if they've been convinced to vote Democrat, right? But I also think that we didn't get those polling numbers until the middle of September, and O'Brien has been, opening the door to the Trump campaign for much longer than just that polling period. So if he was waiting for his membership to push him in one direction or another, he didn't do that. And so it could also be the percentage of people who voted in these internal polls because they saw O'Brien at the, talking to the Trump campaign, and they were like, okay, well, yeah, I want to do that. There's a lot of different reasons why this could be happening. And again, I think that, we're so close to the election that I'm not entirely certain that if they chose to endorse in one direction or another, that it would matter as much as if it had happened in June, for example. So
I'm a Teamster, but what I hear you saying is that may not be the most important issue for me. Issues around labor relations board, those interpretations may not be the number one issue that's driving my vote. Is that a fair characterization? Or
sure.
do they not see the difference?
Well, I've been on a number of picket lines reporting on strikes in the last 4 years or so. And I've had many, before I was in Los Angeles, I was in the Midwest. I'm now moving back to the Midwest. I lived in Nebraska for my entire life. And so I'm, blue city in a red state kind of thing. And the conversations you have with a lot of folks is that everyone that you meet who is, middle class, working class, low class, who are fighting every day for a good wage, they understand that there is an issue, that living in this country is extremely difficult, that organized labor often helps improves working conditions, which is why we're standing on strike. These contracts are important, and that there are problems with mobility, putting groceries on your table, and the thing that it comes down to is a lot of people have differing explanations for who is to blame for that, and therefore differing solutions, right? And so, a lot of the conversations amongst the rank and file is, we know the boss is the enemy. We know that this person in this plant is making our lives miserable, but it doesn't necessarily always translate to a wider conversation about capitalist conditions in the United States and how that can be fixed, and who really is to blame, because it's certainly not the migrant worker that's on the line next to you, but those are sort of like one-to-one conversations that I don't know that you can really encapsulate in a internal poll, you know what I mean? So But I do think for a lot of Teamsters, they are sick of Trump. And they also are reaching a point where they're sick of their current internal leadership, internationally speaking. And there are a number of reasons why that have nothing to do with the election. And so it'll be interesting to see if internally, as we get closer to a new Teamsters presidential election, what that's going to look like in terms of internal campaigning and who's going to emerge and other candidates and such. So, and we'll be able to come back together and talk about maybe the fallout from this election and what that has, if that's changed people's opinions in the future.
Honestly, that is what concerns me when I see this kind of split in our unions. No pun intended, but perhaps it's apt. It makes me wonder what is going on here.
I think again, unions aren't a monolith, and each local is, comprised of folks from different shops, from different walks of life, and will have their own thoughts about how to proceed. I mean, I think it's tough to talk about these sort of ideological political gaps in any sort of cogent way, because again, this is 1.4 million members nationwide, right? Of the dozens, of the almost dozen of joint councils and state locals, these, in the hierarchy, these statewide locals, close to 1 million members are represented in those endorsements. So, that split there really seems to be more of a cohesive kind of rank and file conversation, healthy, democratic sort of conversation about who you're going to vote for, who you're not going to vote for, and a leadership that is not listening to its membership. And what's ultimately going to happen, if this sort of democratic experiment, if you will, with the Teamsters it's probably going to bear out that the vice president who has committed to running against O'Brien at the next election may find himself in the presidency because folks are dissatisfied with the international leadership and they want to see some change. Just like any other election that we have, if the institution is kind of falling apart or you feel like you're not being heard from the folks that you've elected, then you're going to elect someone else. That's how it should work. So, but again, each union has its own thoughts about it. And obviously we have major organizations like the AFL-CIO that have endorsed Harris. We have the UAW that has, spoken at the DNC and consistently picketed for Harris's campaign and the previous Biden campaign, So as far as labor being represented, we're seeing far more who are interested in a Democratic ticket than we would see under, interested in Trump's campaign. So,
fascinating.
And for the record, you've not been in the weeds. What we've been talking about in both hours of the show is that now a lot of things that we thought were simply fantastical, Mel and Attorney Mathis, Mel Buer, Attorney Mathis, this is the reality. I'm not going to say the new reality. It's the reality. And it's more than a little unsettling. Because no one is, because, I only have about 5 minutes left here, and I want you all to just help me with this. I'm thinking of all of the homeless people. And not just the homeless people. I'm thinking of the people who are sick, the people, Black women are more likely to die from breast cancer, Mel. But you can't really afford the health care. I mean, and we just keep on going. And I see the unions, and I love unions. Hey, I'm a union woman. But I also see them a little too close to the owners and not close enough to the people. And I'm wondering if this is what we're seeing with this vote, because it's like the board went this way and the rank and file went that way. And I'm like, how does that work? Who are you all working for? Who are you working with?
Well, and again, yeah, the way that I kind of see it, I'm also a union member. I'm a News Guild member. I have my disagreements with my leadership, but I also have a shop to organize, and I care about my immediate working conditions, right? And I think that a lot of rank and file workers see this as it's an important election, obviously, but the organizing will continue whether it's under a Trump banner or it's under a Harris banner, right? It's really in the toolbox. It is one tactic, right, that you employ in order to try and improve your working conditions, improve your living conditions, and improve your community, right? But it's going to continue apace either way. It's just a matter of, do you want to have a particular candidate and then a subsequent administration that may be slightly easier to organize under, that may be more interested in passing something like the PRO Act, for example, instead of being, dumped in the weeds by an emboldened party that has never shown up for the working class at all, and those are the sort of conversations that people are having. And it's my sense that if you were to do some sort of exit poll of just union members, you might find that the folks who show up to the ballot box, I'm not going to make any major predictions, but you may find that a lot of them are really going to be voting for their own interests, right? And you would hope, at least, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully that means that in the future we will have better chances for better organizing to organize, these companies and these shops that have been experiencing an easier time under a Biden NLRB than we have under Trump NLRB, for example. So, and you can point to data that shows that it's absolutely an easier time the last 3.5 years than it ever was under a Trump administration. So, new organizing, for example, I know we got to get out of here, but just an example of Trump's NLRB, it was a very, the folks that he appointed to the board were not necessarily on the sort of progressive pro-labor side. They made it very difficult for graduate students, for example, TAs and research assistants at universities to organize and at these private universities. And under a Biden NLRB, what we've seen is probably the largest amount of new organizing has happened on private university campuses, right? And it's, we're talking thousands of new union members of, PhD candidates teaching courses who are employed by the university, right? Who now have a union contract and a living wage and better working conditions, that literally was not possible in the first half of the Trump administration because the NLRB rules were that these graduate students were not allowed to organize legally. And those rules were changed in subsequent years to allow that. So, with subsequent rulings. So, and that's just one example of, when you have a presidency that is at least ostensibly like pro-union or at least open to those conversations, then you do see by leaps and bounds better working conditions, better living conditions, better wages for workers who are able to, have less barriers to organizing themselves in their workplace. So, yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, it is fascinating because it's really a sign of the times. Some people are saying Trump did this. I'm like, no, he's a symptom. He's not the cause. And you might not like him, but he's a symptom of a deeper problem we've got.
Yeah.
And if this American idea and ideal is going to this, you can, to me, it's I would have it's and I don't always agree with my union, But it's like when the rank and file are going this way, Mel, and the board is going that way. I mean, I feel like I'm watching all the corporations do this, including the Democrats and the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
The rank and file over here, and the donors. Yeah, I said it over there.
Right.
And just in a minute, well, you know what? I want you to chew on that for a minute because I want to give you the last word. Attorney Mathis, where do we go from here?
Well, the first place we go is vote.gov or vote.org and make sure that we know that we have a plan to vote, whether it's by mail, whether it's early voting, whether it's on the absentee ballot, but vote. If you care about this country, if you care about your children and your grandchildren, if you care about this experiment,
Hmm.
don't be intimidated because that will play into the hands of some forces in the country right now that would rather see a smaller electorate. And I guess the other thing, as a sometimes South Carolinian, over the last 40 years, I've watched the automotive industry move south
Yeah.
in places like Tennessee and Alabama and South Carolina. And every one of those plants, unless it's changed recently, is in a congressional district represented by a member of the GOP, for whom union membership is anathema. All those nice, shiny BMWs being made in Greenville, that's Lindsey Graham territory.
Absolutely.
And it just seemed the dissonance just kind of just, and people in that region, Volkswagen in Tennessee, Mercedes down in Alabama, Toyota in Kentucky, every one of those plants. And those are good jobs. They don't pay what they would pay in Detroit, but they pay a whole lot more than you would make doing factory work in South Carolina or Tennessee or Alabama. And I just want to hug my union members and say, or hug my auto workers and say, look, don't let these folks fool you. You're adding value. They wouldn't be building those cars if they weren't making money. Join UAW and organize yourselves and get what you truly deserve for your labor. And that it doesn't have anything to do with Teamsters particularly, but it just strikes me as being somehow dissonant. Doesn't make
Well,
sense.
definitely, there's a lot of hope for, the UAW's plans for organizing the South, and they're having success, which is great. And that isn't to say that really smart, talented, brilliant, passionate people have, you know, been trying to organize unions within the South for the last many decades, right?
All my
Um,
life about.
yeah, it is something to there is something to be said for the last couple of years of at least elevating um, unions in a more public conversation and in a positive light, which is something that I didn't grow up with in the aughts. It just wasn't part of the conversation. And red state, Nebraska, really wasn't part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But it is now, and they hold political power in a way that you kind of just like let the endorsements float by. It didn't really matter that much. The fact that we're even having this conversation now is to say something about the resurgence of organized labor and the potential for it to
Mm-hmm.
sort of
Well,
move.
for the tail not to wag the dog, right?
Yeah.
Because it seems like from the bottom up, the rank and file are not listening to the board. They're saying, no, you need to listen to me. And if you jump out here and endorse him or her or him, you're going to have a problem. You're going to tear this union up. And I think, that's what I'm seeing. And I'm just, it's an interesting time.
Yeah.
When we need you
Absolutely.
more than ever. We need them more than, but I'm going to give a minute to you and a minute to just when your closing thought, Mel.
Sure. Yeah. I think what you're getting to is that there is this disparity between the rank and file and the leadership in some of the major unions in terms of not, just this, but other things as well. And the late, great Jenny McAlevey wrote about unions as being just like your local city council, it's an institution.
Mm.
And in order to maintain the institution, you have to participate in it. And in order for you to be able to say there's a problem here and we need to change things, you need to get active in organizing it.
Right.
And you need to participate in the democracy that it creates, right? So if there is that disparity in the Teamsters Union where you're seeing these joint councils and these various other places breaking with international leadership, then the obvious answer to me is, okay, now we need to start organizing ourselves so that we can furnish a slate candidates, all of these resolutions that we can bring to our next convention where this vote is happening, and we can say, we're not going to do this again. Time to find someone better. Thanks for your service. So that's the way that I kind of look at it. And I think that's, an important sort of piece. And again, it's not perfect, but it is something. And it's something to be proud of, I think, as a union member. So join your local union or organize one is my final thought. So
no, I mean, I love it because I have to tell you, I mean, Attorney Janice Mathis and Mel Buer, I have to tell you, I have learned a lot from Reverend Jackson in politics. And I see it with with Bernie Sanders when my parents were endorsing him, 4 years ago. My mother said, "I am so tired, Bernie. We just keep getting kicked around, and everybody's mad with us all the time." He said, "Oh, you're used to it. You're used to it. It's okay." I was like, "You're right." She said, she looked at him. She said, "Oh, you're right. You're right." And and I think that we all have to understand things are not always going to go the way you want them to go. But you got to get involved, everybody. Don't sit on the sidelines. Remember, voting is the end of the beginning. It's not the beginning of the end. You have got to get involved. Please go to vote.org every single day and find out if you've been taken off these voter rolls. The plan is to get 2 million people knocked off the voter rolls. They're already almost at 900,000 as of a couple of weeks ago. If you are not registered to vote by October 7th, you will not be able to vote in this election. That is real. And if you don't get in a union and make it strong, you're not going to have a pension plan. I mean, you're not going to have basic rights. Your employer will be able to do anything they want to you. So with all of the man-made constructs that have the problems that man-made things do, unions work. But they work when you work them. How about that? Reverend Johnny Coleman used to say that. It works when you work it. So you got to get involved. And like you said, pull together a slate that's going to represent you and your interests. And I'm glad that people are beginning to wake up. I'm Santita Jackson, sending you all so much love. Vote.org. If you go vote early and you have problems at the polls, go to 866 Our Vote. Do not leave the polls until you have gotten in that booth. Don't do that provisional ballot. Get in there and vote, and don't you move until you make them make America what America's supposed to be to you and for you. I love you, everybody. Have a great one. God bless you. And I'll see you tomorrow on the Santita Chat.